This morning we're looking at Jesus Christ pictured in the prophets. And as we said, it's a Bible bite. So we're just giving you a taster, just an appetizer about the subject, really, so that you can have a good start at looking at the subject and maybe go away and read it for yourself. So we're doing a bit of a theme about Jesus Christ. This time we're looking at pictured in the prophets. So we're going to this morning look at some prophecies and see them fulfilled in the New Testament. And just to make it easy for this morning, because we've only got 10-15 minutes, we're going to pick three aspects of Jesus' life: his birth, his death, and his resurrection. And we're going to look at those three. So essentially, we're really going to look at 6 passages, 3 in the Old Testament, 3 in the New Testament. And for speed, we'll put them on the screen for you and we'll have a look. But before we do, I just thought it might be interesting to talk about the chances of prophecies being fulfilled. So we're all familiar with the lottery, whether we do it or not. And these are the odds currently for winning the lottery in the UK, 1 in 45 million and something, which are, pretty high odds. Now, someone cleverer than I has worked out the odds of fulfilling prophecies. And they've worked out that the odds of a man fulfilling just 8 prophecies is 1 in a very big number. So many, many more times unlikely than winning the lottery, which I thought was really interesting. I can't even pronounce what that number might be. But actually, when you think about Jesus actually fulfilled over 300 prophecies. So this morning we're going to look at 3 out of 300 or more. But what it makes you understand is that it wasn't by chance. This is all part of God's plan, that God has enabled people to prophesy about what Jesus would do, to look forward and advise us so that we can look out and see these prophecies for ourselves and understand that what God says is true. So, this hasn't happened by chance. This is God's design behind all of this when we think about these prophecies this morning. And we can remember some of those big numbers maybe. So let's look at the first of our 3 aspects of Jesus' life. We're going to look at his birth. And in the Old Testament, it says in Isaiah, "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." And it's a very short verse, but it gives us some very specific information that the person to give birth to this child is going to be a virgin, that the child is going to be a boy, and that his name is going to be called Emmanuel. And before we go into the New Testament, we need to just recognize that Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, was written probably 700 years before Jesus was born. So it's not like Isaiah is going, "Oh, I know this has happened," and he's written it down at the time. This is 700 years in advance. So this could only happen because God has told Isaiah what was going to happen. So when we go to the New Testament, we read in Matthew chapter 1, "And an angel of the Lord appeared unto him," that's Joseph, "in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." And all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. "Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. Now, just very quickly this morning, we can see there, can't we, that the 3 bits of information that Isaiah told us 700 years before the birth of Jesus are all entwined in Matthew verses. So David's being advised not to worry about taking Mary to his wife, even though they haven't come together as husband and wife yet, because the child in her has come from God. So she was a virgin. He's told also that she's going to bear a son, and that his name would be called Jesus. And you might think, well, hang on, his name was supposed to be Emmanuel. Well, Emmanuel is the Hebrew, and Jesus is the Greek version, if you like. So the Old Testament is in Hebrew, and the New Testament's in Greek. So what we see there is that Jesus means Saviour, or God will save, or Yahweh saves us. And that's exactly what Emmanuel means, that God is with us to save us. So we see very deliberately that God has inspired Isaiah to know all these things about the birth of Jesus. And we can see these prophecies about Jesus, and therefore we can see very much that Jesus was pictured in the prophets. Now, I just want to, before we move on to the next aspect of his life, I just wanted to put this verse up here, just to talk about this idea that we see in Matthew that all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken. Now Romans says, for whatever was written in former days, so what was written in advance, was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. And we'll see this in some of the other verses that we look at this morning. But what this is saying is that God has written all these things in advance, that we know in advance what will happen. What he's not saying is that Jesus has a tick list and he's going, oh, look, there's 300 prophecies about me. I need to do that one. And today I need to do that one. And today I need to do that one. No, what God is saying is I've got foreknowledge. You know, I know the path that Jesus will take. I know the things that will happen aforetime. And therefore I can tell you, Isaiah, these are the things that will happen. So Isaiah is telling us what will happen. Jesus isn't deliberately fulfilling them. And that's very much the same with our own lives. God knows what our path is, but it's still our path. We're still walking it, but God knows in advance what we're going to do. So I just thought that was interesting because sometimes that might be a little bit confusing. So let's look at his death. And we've got a circle there for the tomb with the door rolled shut. And he was oppressed and he was afflicted, it tells us in Isaiah, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent. So he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as of for this generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people, and they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. So we see another prophecy from Isaiah, a bit of illustrative language, if you like, but it very clearly says that this person that's being talked about is going to be a lamb, they're going to be sacrificed, they're going to die, that they would be quiet, they wouldn't open their mouth, and also, interestingly, that they would make their grave with the wicked and with a rich man, which seems an odd thing to say. But when we go to the New Testament, we can see that all these things are fulfilled. So the prophecy has quite a lot of detail. Again, we're going to go to Matthew just for convenience. And it says in Matthew 27, see this first portion here, it says, and he trusts in God, let God deliver him now. This is what they said to him when Jesus was on the cross, if he desires him. For he said, I am the Son of God. And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. So we see there, don't we? We're fulfilling a little bit of that prophecy from Isaiah. Because remember it said that he would make his grave with the wicked. Well, on the cross, he had robbers either side of him. You know, he had wicked men with him at his death. So we see that bit fulfilled 700 years later. And Matthew goes on to say, when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. And he went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean linen shroud, and laid it in a new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. And we know from reading around the Bible that Joseph had cut this tomb for himself. It was his own personal tomb. It was a rich man's tomb. And yet he took the body of Jesus, wrapped it in the burial linen, and put him there. So we see again, don't we, that Jesus actually did make his death with a rich man, or certainly in a rich man's tomb. And you start to see how prophecy really does work, and when prophecy really is true, that, you know, we can read through Isaiah and we can either people of that day could picture what was going to happen to Jesus, and they should have been looking out for those things. And as I say, this is just a Bible bite. We're giving you a flavour. But if you went to Matthew 27, you could also read around the time Jesus stood before Pilate. And if you read those verses, it's around verses 12, 13, 14, that sort of place. And you can see that Pilate accuses Jesus of certain things. And actually, if you go to the record, Jesus doesn't say anything. He doesn't answer his accusers. And therefore you see again, don't you, this idea that he didn't open his mouth and he was silent. So maybe after this, if you've got time, go and look at Matthew 27 and read all of that chapter and see the story behind it. And finally, we're going to look at resurrection. This is the third aspect of the life of Jesus that I wanted just to touch on today. And we're going to read from Psalm, and you might think Psalm actually isn't a prophecy. It's not what we would normally think of as a prophecy. But certainly a lot of the things that David wrote and said were prophetic. And it says in Psalm 16, I've set the Lord always before me. So God is always before me because he is at my right hand. I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. So David's saying, if God's with him, he can be really confident in life about what's going on. And he carries on and says, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. Well, Sheol's the Hebrew word for grave. Or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures evermore. And that passage, you won't abandon my soul to the grave, or let your Holy One see corruption. David's actually talking about two different people. He's talking about his own life in the grave, but also the Holy One. Well, we know there's only one that was holy, and that was Jesus. So David is prophesying, we would suggest, that Jesus wouldn't see corruption, that he would be raised from the dead. And we see that, David has a lot of hope in this. It gives him a lot of confidence in life. And you might not be convinced by this, but let's go to the New Testament and we'll show you that this truly is a prophecy about the resurrection of Jesus. You see there, we have a little resurrection symbol. And in Acts, which was written for us by Paul through inspiration, it says this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. And we've alluded to that before, haven't we? That God knows what's going to happen. You crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. So Paul's confirming, and he was contemporary with Christ, confirming that Jesus really did die. And God raised him up. So again, confirming the resurrection. And that you loosed the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. For David says concerning him, I saw the Lord always before me, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart be glad and my tongue rejoice. My flesh also will dwell in hope. For you have not abandoned my soul to Hades, and that's the New Testament word for grave, the Greek word for grave. Or let your Holy One see corruption. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. So actually what we see there is that Paul, the writer of the Acts, is saying, do you remember what David said in Psalm 16? He was being prophetic of this situation with Jesus. And actually, Paul is directly quoting what David said. So Paul is telling us that, yes, David was prophetically speaking. He was giving you a picture back in Psalm of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that is why David had hope, that David would be raised, that David would have life, and why he was confident in his service with God. And therefore, you might think, well, that's really good. But there's one important thing that I want you to try and understand. If you read around Acts in your own time, you'll also see these verses. And this is our last bit for this morning. It says in Acts chapter 2, and I love this verse, it really does illustrate to me one very important Bible teaching. Acts chapter 2 says, brothers, I may say to you with confidence about the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. And it goes on in verse 34 to say, if we hadn't really understood it, for David did not ascend into the heavens. So actually what that's telling us is that David hasn't been raised from the dead, that David hasn't gone to heaven like a lot of churches teach. The Bible teaches us that resurrection is real. It teaches us that David had a great hope in resurrection. But actually what it teaches us is that resurrection for those that have already died, other than Jesus, has not yet happened. And you might think, well, where is the hope? Well, David, through prophecy and through what God told him, knew that resurrection would happen. Paul saw that resurrection happened and recorded it for us, and that Jesus did raise from the dead. And therefore that gives everyone that has faith in Christ and his Father, gives us great hope in resurrection. And there's no need to go to heaven like Jesus did, because Jesus teaches on many occasions that he'll return to the earth. And it's at that time that those that are dead will be raised. So David's hope was well founded. He will be raised from the dead. It hasn't happened yet, but at the return of Jesus, he will be raised from the dead. And I think that's just a nice place to finish. It gives us hope that all these prophecies that we've seen about Jesus, these three, and there's many, many more as we've just seen, should give us hope like they gave the people hope at the time. So that's the end of what we're talking about this morning. And hopefully that's just a little appetizer to show you about, Christ was really pictured in the prophets. Thank you.